Welcome to Title Talks, the show where you can spend some time with the most influential people in the title industry while they share their insight on everything from making your operation more efficient to the latest technology, sales and marketing strategies, hot topics, and more. Take a minute to follow us so that you never miss an episode. Title Talks is a production of PropLogix. We want to be your preferred vendor partner for title production tasks. Our job is to win you back time that you can spend with your customers, taking a real lunch break, or getting new business. We care about your success. That's why we make this podcast. Be sure to check out all of our time-saving services by heading to proplogix.com/services. Now to today's episode. There are a lot of moving parts and deadlines when it comes to helping to facilitate a 1031 exchange, and settlement agents need to be on top of their game even more so. But being able to close these types of transactions can open you up to repeat business and growth for your company. Today's guest is Eric Brecher of C.D.E.C 1031. He's a certified exchange specialist and qualified intermediary for 1031 exchanges. He's sharing what you need to know to confidently approach exchanges and grow your company. I'm Lindsay Gordon, and this is Title Talks. Welcome, Eric. Thank you so much for joining us on Title Talks. We're really excited to share a little bit more about 1031 exchanges with our audience. And so I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself. Let us know a little bit about you and your company and what you guys do.
Super. Thank you, Lindsay, for having me. So my name is Eric Brecher, and I'm an attorney of over 25 years. I hold a certified exchange specialist designation, for which there are only approximately 130 in the entire country, and have served as a qualified intermediary for over 18 years. I work for C.D.E.C 1031 Exchange. I am based out of New York, but handle 1031s coast to coast, and as we may get into occasionally internationally. C.D.E.C is part of Wintrust Financial Corporation, which is a $50 billion bank and publicly traded company. And so we can also talk about, a little later, I think we'll close the roll to QI, the fact that it is an unregulated industry. So working with a regulated company, of course, adds an additional level of comfort, security to both settlement agents and their investor clients.
Okay, so let's start at the basics. What are 1031 exchanges and who is it that they benefit?
Great question. So 1031 exchanges are not a loophole. They've been around for over 100 years, and in its current form allows only real estate investors to defer their federal capital gains tax, their depreciation recapture tax, their state income tax where applicable, and their net investment income tax, so long as when selling a piece of investment property, they buy a replacement piece of real property. It used to be available for artwork and machinery and equipment and aircraft, other assets. But post-Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which went into effect in January of 2018, 1031s are only for real estate and investment real estate at that.
Okay, so how do you define, like, does it have to be someone who regularly, buys and sells real estate? Like, could it be someone with just like a secondary property that they buy, like a vacation home or something along those lines? How does that work?
So yes, interesting you mentioned vacation home. So I'll just tackle that first. There is a safe harbor for second homes and vacation homes that really limit the personal use of the taxpayer and do require that it is rented out. And I'm sparing all the nuances, but there is some availability to use a 1031 for a second home or vacation home. Generally, it is, we would expect, for either raw land that has been held for investment or a multifamily, it could be a single family or a condo that's been rented out, of course, all the way up to shopping centers and any commercial, self-storage, all types of other investment real estate. It's all about intent. So you did mention a little earlier about people buying and selling, buying and selling. When I hear that, I kind of think of flippers, right? Now, if somebody flipping property is buying an investment, let's say a single family, and a little spackle and paint, and they give it back to the realtor 30 days later to sell it. That wouldn't seem to be an investment that rises to the level of acceptable for a 1031. It appears their intent all along is to resell it. And we have guidance from a particular case that says the intent should be not to liquidate it, meaning to flip it, or not to use it for your personal pursuits. So again, there are some applications where it still may be acceptable, but that should be the general takeaway. You shouldn't intend to just move into the property if it's a single dwelling type of property. There are some applications if you wanted to buy a two-family and live in a portion and rent out the other portion, that can be okay. But again, shouldn't be the intent to be moving into it, shouldn't be the intent to be reselling it. So typically a developer who either buys an apartment complex or apartment building and converts it to condo, that has now become inventory and their intent is to resell it. That would not be eligible for a 1031 unless maybe on their books and records they moved some as held for investment and rented them out for, let's say the next 5 years. But if they're building a property to sell it, doesn't appear to be the appropriate intent for a 1031.
Okay. So as a settlement agent, am I looking for specific types of deals? Am I marketing myself? Like how is it that this sort of benefit comes across and I am able to either tell my clients about it or are they coming to me to ask, like, can they benefit from this?
So that's a great question. And a lot of that probably is a function of the relationship between the settlement agent and that center of influence that has brought you that business. It would sort of be expected that if it came from an attorney or if it came from a real estate agent, I would hope that they maybe have had some dialogue around the fact that this property that's being sold was held as an investment. But certainly as a settlement agent, it would be a good practice to just kind of confirm with everybody whether or not a 1031 exchange has been contemplated, because you have the ability to add some value there. And certainly if you know it's a multifamily, that's going to be an investment property, right? If it's some mixed use or a shopping center, I mean, that's an investment property. But I always would recommend, even if it's a condo, even if it's a single family, have that conversation. It's just a simple, quick question. Have you been renting this out? Is this an investment property? Now, ultimately, you're not going to make that decision for them, and there may be reasons for them not to do an exchange. Maybe they have a loss. Maybe they have a carry forward loss, and so it doesn't benefit them. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're upside down on the property, and maybe they're going to sell it for a loss. So there's a lot of reasons maybe somebody would not do a 1031, but I think you add a lot of value in just raising the question, because you're also going to save a fire drill at the closing table, which I've been involved in many times and assisted people, but nobody really likes that, right? So yeah, I think that's something that you certainly would benefit and endear yourself to that investor or attorney or whoever has referred that to you, a real estate agent, to bring that up. Because there are a lot of nuances, so kind of setting down the path, if you want me to kind of go into it, if you brought that up or if it's brought to you that this is going to be part of a 1031, you do, to the extent that a settlement agent may be generating the purchase and sale agreement, you first and foremost want to make sure you have some what we call cooperation clause language in that purchase and sale. And there's nothing real magical to the language, but you do want to make sure the other side, and usually it's going to be reciprocal language, that it may be part of a 1031, and that everybody will cooperate with one another. And maybe your client is selling a property that is truly their primary residence, their primary. So it's not eligible for a 1031. There's no accessory dwelling unit, no investment component to it. So maybe they are truly selling their primary, and that's not going to be a 1031. But maybe the buyer is acquiring it and plans to rent it out. So I always recommend having that language be boilerplate, right? You just cover yourself from the get-go.
Having that language as sort of standard or boilerplate, what are some other things that a settlement company could do to kind of be set up or ready to potentially handle something like this?
Yeah, so, obviously being a real estate professional in the settlement agent field, having an understanding of how 1031s work, both from the taxpayer standpoint as well as the mechanics and procedurally, certainly is helpful. And again, can endear you to those around you that you're working with, whether it's the real estate investor directly or the real estate agent or the lawyer. So, understanding again, we want to have that cooperation clause language in the contract. You probably want to know whether the taxpayer intends to roll all of their money through the 1031 exchange, or are they planning to take some cash at the time of closing, which they are permitted to do. I mean, they're going to lock themselves into tax on that money they take, but it is an option to do. So again, that would be an important thing to know as a qualified intermediary. We would need to build that amount into our documents that they may be taking at closing. Obviously, you would need to know that or communicate that so that you're prepared to give that money to the taxpayer via check or wire, whatever that kind of closing process is going to look like. I know there's people around the country and it varies as it relates to them listening to this. So that's another thing to think about. Now, along the lines of taking cash, various states have withholding requirements. So if it's part of a 1031, generally there will be some exception for purposes of the 1031 where there will not be a withholding. So I trust everybody's familiar with their withholding issues and requirements for their respective states. But understanding that a 1031 will typically allow all of the money to come into the qualified intermediary account. We'll talk about that process a little bit. But just getting ahead of that. And then also, again, there could be FIRPTA issues. Maybe it is a foreign investor selling U.S. property, again, knowing that FIRPTA issues. So those would be some important things, again, at the outset. Then from other procedural standpoints, now that we've, purchase and sales fully executed, you've got the cooperation clause language in there. We know that the taxpayers may be going to roll all of their funds through the exchange. Well, now let's talk about sort of the next step. So the qualified intermediary is going to need to get a copy of that purchase and sale agreement. They're going to want to get any trust or corporate documents related to that taxpayer, if, assuming that it's not an individual. Also, personally, I'd like to see the title report. I'm really only looking to confirm the vesting of title, but it is also good to see the property description as well. So those are some of the other procedural mechanics that a qualified intermediary is typically going to require. Now, as a bank, and being that we are going to be opening a bank account and a trust for the taxpayer, there are some, of course, KYC, know your customer, identification things that we would need to get as well and collect. So we have a questionnaire that helps digest that. But from that's not really a settlement agent issue. Again, settlement agent is getting the purchase and sale agreement, title report, and any corporate or trust documents. And of course, we need to get that before the close of escrow. It is imperative that all of the exchange documentation is put in place before the close of escrow. And we don't need them notarized. We don't need originals. They can be done via DocuSign or whatever other electronic signature format. So that really helps expedite things. But all of that needs to be done before the close. I keep reinforcing that because unfortunately, once a month, I will get a phone call from somebody that wants to do a 1031, And I've got to give them the bad news that they blew it. They tell me they closed yesterday. They told me they closed last week, last month. That ship has sailed. There is, for some reason, what stands out in taxpayers' minds is that they haven't deposited the money. And that's an important part of an exchange, which now I'll get into for settlement agents to think about, which is it is imperative for a taxpayer to have a valid exchange that the taxpayer does not take actual possession of the money, nor constructive receipt of the money, which would be if their own attorney or accountant or realtor were to just hold the money. So, first step is it has to be set up as an exchange before that close of escrow. And so, what we would do is when we get all the necessary documents, we are going to generate all the necessary 1031 exchange paperwork. There's an exchange agreement, there's an assignment agreement. Now, that's an important point for the settlement agent. They are going to have to get the buyers in a forward exchange where, which is the majority, call it 90% of 1031s, a taxpayer sells their investment first and then later buys a replacement property. We can also touch on a little bit later, maybe reverse exchanges or improvements, which are important for people to understand as well. But in the forward exchange process, that taxpayer is going to get us our information. They're going to sign the exchange agreement, trust agreement, assignment agreement, but we are going to send to the settlement agent our wire instructions and an assignment for which they need to get the buyer's acknowledgement. So those are two important points. And lastly, on the settlement statement itself, the qualified intermediary should be listed as in a forward exchange, the seller as QI for the taxpayer. So those are the three things. You're going to want those wire instructions. You're going to get that assignment agreement acknowledged by the buyer. And on the settlement statement, listing the qualified intermediary as the seller when we're talking about a forward and the sale is taking place first. And then, again, having a signature block for which we're only acknowledging not as to the accuracy of those prorations. Okay. And then, of course, when the taxpayer is buying replacement property, again, there's going to be an assignment from that purchase and sale to the qualified intermediary. So now it'll be a reverse process. We're going to appear as the buyer, qualified intermediary as buyer for the taxpayer. We're going to, again, want to have that acknowledgement. And we have a direction to disperse form. Taxpayer is going to get that over to us and say, hey, I need $1 million sent to ABC escrow on May 2nd, and out goes the money. So, understanding some of those mechanics is very important. And again, I'm talking about kind of the majority, 90% of the exchanges where taxpayer sells first and buys afterwards.
Okay. So with the qualified intermediary, explain a little bit about what that role is. You had mentioned earlier that potentially title professionals could become that qualified intermediary. Is there a benefit to that? Should you, kind of find your go-to qualified intermediary? Like, how does that play into it?
Well, so selfishly, I'm not looking for additional competition, right? So I'm always happy to be a resource. I will say this. It's one of those things that you really either have to be in it or you're not in it, because there have been causes of action against escrow title companies. There have been defalcations of even one of the largest title insurance companies. It is going, while, again, I'm a lawyer, and despite being a lawyer, I can't give legal or tax advice to the taxpayer. No qualified intermediary can do that. Again, there are a whole lot of times where I'm providing guardrails and advising clients, not in a legal capacity, but just, hey, this is going to be an issue. You should talk to your attorney or CPA. So you definitely, and this is a good point for me to stress, you don't want to be giving any legal or tax advice. So, to answer your question, I think it's helpful to have a resource in an established qualified intermediary so that you can focus on your business as a settlement agent. And, so you sort of asked a little bit earlier, I just want to make sure I close the loop on it about sort of the benefits. So, being familiar with 1031s, of course, it's helpful because you will be thought of when there's an attorney or some real estate agent that has a closing that they know is going to be a 1031, to the extent they have the ability to bring you into a transaction, knowing that you are familiar with the process and or have a qualified intermediary that's going to take care of the transaction, that can be trusted, it is secure. I think that's going to pay you back in dividends. It's one of those things. Everything's always easy till something kind of goes sideways, right? So that's where having, over 18 years of experience, and some of my colleagues have been handling exchanges for over 25 years. So we all kind of work together, which raises a point also. It's important probably not to be working with some sole practitioner, because if they get hit by a bus tomorrow, your exchange is not going to be completed, right? There is nobody there that is going to see things through. And unfortunately, I learned of just that situation that took place last summer with a sole practitioner who fell ill and nobody could get a hold of him, and a lot of things went bad. So, you want to work with an established company that has the security, the experience, is going to provide that service. And so again, as it relates to 1031s for settlement agents, we're not getting into all the critical deadlines, but, a taxpayer must buy a replacement property within 180 days of their close of escrow. They must identify that replacement property within 45 calendar days. But I raise this because you're going to have a pretty motivated buyer on your hand. And so to the extent that you are selling title insurance, right, you have assisted in the sale, and now you have an opportunity to hopefully not only handle the settlement, but also handle title insurance on the replacement property, or could be multiple properties. Again, I am not tied to. We don't own any. We're not involved. I just am a resource, but that's an issue oftentimes for maybe large underwriters who have a 1031 division. The concern, as I've been told, is, settlement agent may be concerned it's going to get away from them as it relates to the title insurance on the replacement property. So, working with a completely independent company has advantages.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about reverse exchanges or improvements.
Yeah, so this is an important thing for everybody to understand as well. So a reverse exchange, as I just mentioned, normally when a taxpayer sells their investment, they have 45 calendar days to identify replacement property, and they have 180 days, again, from the close of escrow to acquire one or more of their identified properties. In a reverse exchange, a taxpayer can actually buy their replacement property first. We flip those time periods. Now they have 45 calendar days to identify one of their existing holdings that will be sold within 180 days from the date that the property is acquired. 90% of the time, probably more than that, a taxpayer will have us perform a different role from the qualified intermediary, a role called an exchange accommodation title holder. Because a taxpayer can't own the two properties at the same time and do an exchange, we will sit on title through a newly formed LLC. For federal income tax purposes, we are serving as the owner and the agent of the taxpayer. And now they have 180 days again to get their existing investment sold. So we oftentimes see that where it's maybe a purely opportunistic buyer, where some property fell out of the sky, or maybe they're really aggressively looking for a steal, and they find something, they've got to close in 30 days, let's say, and they have an investment that they can sell, but they haven't even put it on the market. So it's going to take 2-3 months to get that sold. So it's generally that type of opportunistic buyer, or it might be somebody that's using it in their trade or business. So maybe they're looking to expand their warehouse and they have a very, limited geographical area that they want to buy in, and maybe they have some, special business that, may not be available to all, neighborhoods. So again, they want to really find something that's going to suit their needs, and then they'll worry about selling. So, I regularly see that. And so that's normally where a reverse exchange would lend itself. Now, the improvement exchange is sort of the same structure, except, of course, typically the taxpayer now has sold first. But let's say they sold something for $5 million, and now they're buying something for $4 million. But they know they need to redo the roof and the windows and lots of work to it. It's again going to be that structure where we're going to sit on title because taxpayer can't do work to property they already own. So we will sit on title to that property while that work is being done. But again, from the date that they sell their property, they have 180 days to buy their property and get that work done. So, and again, I'm oversimplifying just in the interest of, not getting us into the weeds.
Yeah, yeah. With the market how it is right now with high interest rates, not great inventory, like how frequently are we seeing 1031 exchanges happening?
Well, certainly interest rates affected some of the transaction. And unfortunately, we are seeing, and, I just saw a very large transaction in New York where they turned over the keys and a very sophisticated owner sold a property in another situation at quite a loss, quite surprising. So certainly it's impacted, of course, the real estate market, as I think everybody has seen. That being said, 2022 was off the charts, right? Just activity wise was off the charts. Last year in 2023, things pulled back. I am seeing a nice build off of last year. And, I'd say maybe last year pulled back by, let's say maybe a third, roughly, somewhere in and around there. 25%, something like that. So definitely seeing some building. I don't know that that's representative of everybody. I mean, maybe some are seeing a little more. I was just returned from my industry conference, my mid-year, just a couple weeks ago, and I heard a lot of people saying that they're seeing quite a slowdown. So, it's for me, fortunately, I am doing business nationwide. Mm-hmm. So if some geographical area is slowing down, there probably is another one that's heating up. Certainly, being in the tri-state area that I am, I see a lot of people that are rotating down to the southeast. I mean, that's something we've seen for a while. So I have the luxury of being that it's a national business for me. It kind of smooths out some of those things. But certainly some people on a regional level might be impacted more. So, I definitely think it's something for settlement agents that can be helpful to think about. And, to the extent, for example, well, I'll turn it back over to you.
No, keep going.
I was going to say that I know that you've talked about, or asked about how settlement agents can be more involved. And certainly I put myself out there as a resource for any settlement agents that want to develop their business more. They can leverage me. I give CLE classes around the country to lawyers. I give CPE to accountants. I mean, I don't think that's really an area where you're looking to get business. But so for the lawyers, and then, of course, to real estate agents, I regularly give presentations, Q&As to them as well. And, that's at a local level. You typically have to be a school. So I'm not going to suggest that's sort of a national thing that I can issue credits. But if the settlement agent company is approved to offer classes to real estate agents, again, leverage me. I'm happy to come in, do the heavy lifting, give the presentation. And that's where, again, that settlement agent is adding value to that law firm, to that real estate office. And it gives you a little bit of face time. You're not just going back in there with really nothing to say. You're coming with a class, you're coming with very important material that any real estate professional either could use a little brushing up on, I'm sure, or it might be entirely new to them.
Yeah. I was going to ask that. I mean, obviously you went into it, so that's perfect. Is there anything else in terms of what you want to share, or like any other resources that professionals that are listening could turn to?
Well, as far as material wise, look, certainly, I don't know if my number is posted on here, and I know some people may be listening, just and not watching. I know you and I are taping live here, and I think my phone number might be on there, but certainly they can reach out to me via phone, 917 800-455-1551. And I'm always happy to be a resource for, and whether it's settlement agents working with a real estate agent has a question, whatever it is, I'm always happy to be that resource. There are treatises that have been written about them, so that might be something worth taking a read. I mean, I have one right here, which I don't think somebody's looking to read through this. I've sort of done it for them, so
Yeah.
and it might be completely unnecessary for a settlement agent. But there are a lot of things. Oh, one thing I definitely wanted to mention also, and this again goes back to not giving any legal or tax advice, but as it relates to expenses, I would be doing a disservice. I had this something I wanted to mention, and we just kind of got skewed away from it. Obviously, you are going to take care of the prorations for the sale and or the purchase. Understanding that there are certain expenses that if you give a credit to the buyer as a seller doing an exchange, that may create a tax issue. So oftentimes some things should be taken care of outside of closing to make it cleanest for the taxpayer. And again, it's probably outside the scope of what we can really dive into. Maybe we'll do something in the future more advanced or whatever. But just understand that there are ramifications to those prorations. Again, giving credits to the buyer for real estate taxes or security deposits or what am I forgetting? Or rent. But yeah, I'm forgetting. So it's essentially real estate taxes, security deposits. Giving credits to the buyer for that is going to create a tax issue.
Will utilities be an issue or not?
Well, if you're giving again, I would suggest taking care of those things outside of closing. Just have the seller give money to the buyer separately, because it's imperative that all of the funds from that purchase, other than like a realtor fee, transfer taxes, customary closing costs, other than those, that may create a tax issue to the taxpayer if those funds are not received in the exchange account. So yeah, that's sort of an important point to also, by the way, just understanding that there is direct deeding from the seller to the buyer. So the qualified intermediary, when it's a forward exchange, is not going on title.
Okay.
In the reverse, again, remember, we are going to go on title. We're going to be the owner for federal income tax purposes through that newly formed LLC. But in, again, 95% of 1031s, where it's a forward exchange, taxpayer is going to pass title to the buyer through direct deeding. And, I'll just put out there also as an important point, again, I don't think the settlement agents are typically being involved with the negotiations. But one last thing that I'm seeing a real big uptick in is transactions that are involving seller financing. And it should be noted that when a taxpayer is selling a property and extending seller financing to the buyer, that doesn't play well with 1031s. If the taxpayer is not in the financial position to substitute, so let's say somebody's selling something for $2 million and the buyer says, I can come up with $1.5 million, but I need you to finance the other $500,000. If that taxpayer doesn't have $500,000 that they can inject into the exchange account, either at the time of the close of escrow or sort of relatively shortly thereafter before buying replacement property, ultimately they're going to have a tax issue on that $500,000. Now, granted, under installment sale treatment, it may be delayed pursuant to the terms of their note, but just understanding that is not, all things being equal, if you can find a buyer that's just going to pay you all cash without seller financing, that is going to be more beneficial for a taxpayer doing a 1031.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. Thank you so much, Eric. I feel like we covered a lot, and I know there's a lot more that we can dive into. So I think it would be awesome to have you back. Maybe we have you for a webinar or something like that where we give people the opportunity to ask their questions as well.
Sure. Yeah. But, again, always happy to be a resource. And again, that qualified intermediary cannot be the taxpayer's attorney or accountant or realtor. So I serve as that objective outside party to provide that experience, service, and security. So, Lindsay, I thank you so much for having me. And again, happy to be a resource for anybody. Feel free to reach out and call me, and to be continued.
Resources from today's episode can be found in the podcast description. If you're not yet following Title Talks, please do that. And if you are following us, please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It helps more people find us, so thank you in advance. We appreciate you listening, and until next time, happy closings.